Welcome everyone. Today we're going to begin learning about propaganda, and we'll also look at the criteria for this project and see some examples by artists and fellow students. Let's begin by talking about what propaganda means. Propaganda is information or publicity put out by an organization, government, to spread and promote a policy, idea, doctrine, or cause. It comes from a Latin meaning for the propagation of faith. How do we usually perceive propaganda? Is it usually a negative or a positive perception? Propaganda has been used during wars and religious conflicts, and it's often used to control or impact a large group of people, like say a neighborhood, school, city, state, or nation. Right now, as we go through the COVID-19 virus outbreak, the pandemic, we're seeing that propaganda is being used on all of those levels, as well as on a global level, to help spread information about how to keep oneself safe, clean, and to reduce the spread of the disease. And so with that in mind, I want you to think about other examples of propaganda that exist today. Not just some of the negative examples like we might think of from the World War II era, like Nazi propaganda that was used to harm the Jewish population and other populations, but also positive or maybe neutral examples, things that just exist that are propaganda. But maybe we don't think about them that way all the time. So take a few moments to think about maybe advertisements. The way celebrities promote things to us, maybe an athlete and the clothing they wear, maybe a lifestyle by a cultural icon, or maybe it's political campaigns and things we receive in the mail and we see on our social media feeds that begin to influence what it is we believe and how we act. For this project, we're going to each create a propaganda poster. So to begin that process, you need to choose an issue, belief, policy, law, or cause for the subject of your poster. This needs to be something you feel passionate about or that you believe deeply in. Maybe you have a personal connection to it. Create a composition that visually promotes the message, and it includes the use of images and words. Visually promotes. In other words, create an artwork that expresses your idea or your belief visually. We're going to use collage techniques to create the images and text in your poster. Worry not, I'm going to demonstrate some collage processes to you so that you can learn those right along with me. And we're going to use collage rather than another art process because you can do this right at home. You can find materials in your recycling bin, maybe in old books that you have lying around, magazines, and those kinds of materials can all be used, cut up, and reconstituted into an artwork. Now, one of the most important parts of this project, even beyond the visual aspect, is the text that you're going to include. So you have to have two pieces of text in this project. One is a catchphrase. Okay, I want you to have at least one piece of factual information as well. So a catchphrase. A catchphrase is like a slogan or often a rhyming series of words that stick in someone's mind. You see these a lot with television commercials and other ad campaigns. The jingle that goes along with the product or the little message that's on a packaging of something that you buy. It's designed to stick with you so you think about it beyond even the time that you're using that product. And maybe it'll influence you to buy that product or to behave in a certain way. Okay, and that's kind of your goal in your propaganda project as well, to create a clever catchphrase that sticks with people and causes them to think about your message, even after they've looked at your artwork. The one piece of factual information is absolutely critical for this project. And I want to give you an example here. Let's say the message or the belief that is the subject of your propaganda poster has something to do with mental health in teenagers. And specifically, it's focusing on the issue of anxiety and how to deal with anxiety. And so your catchphrase might be something that speaks to that, okay? Talking about test anxiety, for example. Maybe your catchphrase is something like, I am more than a number. And it's referring to ACT testing and SAT testing and all of the other standardized tests that you have to take. Just saying to the viewer, I am more than a number, and making them think about teen anxiety based around testing is a good start, but it's not enough. Because what it does is it leaves the viewer kind of hanging. What do they do with that information? How do they help reduce teen anxiety? How do they help to reevaluate the importance and the stress put upon standardized testing? Okay, what resources might be available to help a teen manage their stress around these things in a healthy way? If you're not providing some sort of resource that leads people to that, and you're only giving them the catchphrase and an image that's catchy and attention grabbing, then you're leaving the viewer incomplete. Okay, we want to arm them with an issue that's important and then arm them with something that they can do about it. And that's where that piece of factual information comes into play. And then to wrap up the criteria, your poster will be 9 by 12 inches in size. That's the size of a sketchbook page. Now, you don't have to use sketchbook paper for this project. You can build this on cardboard or really a variety of materials. And again, when it comes time to start making these, I'm going to have some demonstration videos for you that can that'll help expand your mind a little bit and your thinking on what's possible. Okay, and we can work vertically, we can work horizontally. There are many formats that we can take this in. As you're working on this project, here are the things that I'm looking for. I want to see purposeful decision making. In other words, everything that you're doing is on purpose with an intent for how it's going to impact the viewer. I want to see your skillful artistry. I certainly wish I could be right next to you, demonstrating new ways to work and giving you feedback right on the fly. But because of our current situation, I can't do that. So this is largely dependent on you to use that training that you've received in beginning art and in the first half of studio art to work in an artistically finished way. Now, with that said, you are able to send me photographs of your progress throughout from your iPad, and I can mark right up on those and give you some feedback. Okay, it'll take a little time, but it's certainly a good way for us to work. I want you to have a clear and clever message, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I want you to have efficient and effective design. Way back when we did our flag designs, we talked about efficiency. Okay, and with our logos, we've talked about efficiency. And that means you're getting the maximum message in the minimal imagery. All right. If you're driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour and there's one of those big digital billboards and it's telling a message, and that message is very complex in terms of text and imagery, and you have to look really closely and read a lot of stuff to understand what it's saying, it means that it's not working very well because very few people are going to see that as they fly by it. And if they do stop to pay attention to it or divert their attention to it, it's very likely they're going to get into some sort of car accident. All right, so much like that with your project that you're creating for this assignment, I want you to think about how you can get the maximum information to a person with maximum impact by showing minimal imagery. Okay, and we're going to look at that in just a second when we see some examples of World War II era propaganda. I want you to have new and creative ways to communicate information that people have opinions about. All right, a lot of the topics that you're going to choose for this project are heated topics. Things that are debatable, things that you might argue about over lunchtime or during lunchtime or at a family meal. All right. And so that's all fine and good. But if you don't have a new and creative way to present that argument or that issue, then quite often people are just going to ignore what it is you have to say because they already have a set opinion. Okay. And then this is where we come to the idea of avoiding trite and cliche imagery and information. Trite. That means that it's something that has been used a zillion times, all right? Or that's so simple that it's not thought-provoking. Cliche. Again, that's something that is obvious and overused, overplayed. And so we come back to our idea of clear and clever message. Your message needs to be clever. You need to surprise people into looking at your idea and thinking about your idea. And maybe you're just going to change the way they think. It's possible. And clear. Propaganda fails when it's ambiguous. Okay? So think of any product. If, I don't know, Nike, for instance, is promoting the athletic quality of their shoes, and they want you to spend $300 on their new pair of LeBrons, and you watch the commercial or you look at the advertisement for it, and you're not sure what it is they're telling you. Are those shoes meant to make you jump higher, or are those shoes actually something that's supposed to be worn to a formal dinner? If you leave that advertisement unsure of exactly what those shoes are doing for you, you're very unlikely to spend the $300. Okay, maybe you go to Adidas, Reebok, or somebody else. So similarly, when we're talking about heavier issues, it's really important that you're not ambiguous, that you're not vague about your idea, but instead you're very clear and direct about what it is you're communicating. All right, let's look at some examples of World War II era propaganda. So we're going to start with Rosie the Riveter. As we can see in this advertisement, there's a very clear, powerful image of this woman who has a lot of feminine qualities still. We can see that her eyes are very vibrant, her makeup is on point, but she's got her hair up in this do-rag, she's flexing a big bicep, she's rolling up her sleeves. And as you read into the story of this time in our history, you find out that the reason Rosie the Riveter was so important and was such an icon is because during World War II, where were the men? They were enlisted in the war. Okay, anybody that was able-bodied was overseas fighting in the war. And so the people that were building the tanks, loading the missiles, creating the ammunition and the uniforms and the clothing and doing all of this manual labor were the women, the Rosie the Riveters, back on the home front. This strong, powerful catchphrase, "We can do it," okay, is iconic. It's something that still carries on. And you'll see a lot of examples of remakes of this poster. I also want you to pay attention to the colors. Think for a moment before I say it, what kind of colors are being used here? Okay, those are primary colors. We've got yellow, we've got red, we've got blue. Those are the major colors used in this advertisement. And they're vibrant, they're kind of raw in your face, and they're meant to capture your attention quite quickly. One of my favorite pieces of propaganda from this era, and again, this is all from the early 1940s, created by Americans, usually to be seen by Americans, all right, to inspire behavior. One of my favorite ones is this "Remember Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harder." Okay, so we're going to take a little more of a moment to look at this. Oops. Okay, and so in this example, what I want us to see is some of the symbology that's being used and the wordplay that's being used. Let's begin with the text. Remember Pearl Harbor. Now, if you know much about World War II history, Pearl Harbor was a naval base off the coast of the Hawaiian Islands that the Americans had. We had our naval base there, and it was attacked by the Japanese, and that was really what shoved us into World War II after a lot of resistance. We didn't want to get involved. We didn't want to get engaged. In fact, it was pretty controversial around with our allies. And finally, when the Japanese attacked our naval base, we were like, okay, we got to do this. So Pearl Harbor, remember Pearl Harbor. Down here in this big, bold serif text, it says Pearl, P-U-R-L, harder, down here. Now, pearl, that's not the same pearl as we see up here. Those are two different things. This type of purling deals with sewing. Okay, it's a type of knot or a stitch used to repair damaged clothing or fabric. So as we look at the whole message, remember Pearl Harbor, Pearl harder. Now we notice this text is bigger and it's also at the bottom. It's center justified and it's at the bottom of the page, which is where our eyes have most attention. Okay, so we start up here in the upper left because that's how we've learned how to read. We come over to this image, okay, the hand holding these objects. Our eyes travel downwards, and then we spend all of our attention down here in this large text that says Pearl harder. That's by design. That's what we call an efficient and effective composition. The artist is specifically directing our attention to the major message. Okay, so before we solve the issue of what Pearl harder means, let's go back into our image. We can see three major elements. There's a hand. Okay, that hand is holding two things. One thing it's holding is what kind of looks like a snake coiling around its finger. But we can pretty quickly decide that maybe that's a thread. Okay, and so that thread is wrapping around the finger and it's curling up through these two white objects. These white objects are knitting needles. Now remember how I said purling was like a stitch or a knitting style? These are knitting needles being held onto by this hand. Okay, now two more things we can take from this. One, this thread is wrapping around a finger. That was a way back before the era of iPhones and notifications and all the things that you can program into your digital calendar of remembering. All right, so if you needed to pick up milk on your way home and you were going to forget that as you jumped in your car to drive home after a long day of work, you might tie a string around your finger so that as you gripped onto the steering wheel and went to drive away, you looked and saw that string. You were like, oh, that's right. I've got to go get something today. I have to remember. Okay, it was a little memory device. And so this string wrapped around the finger is remember. Okay, those two things tie together. Now the string comes between these two knitting needles and we can figure out that they're knitting needles. That's fine. But also the artist has been very clever in creating the shape of a V. Now you all are probably pretty used to creating a peace sign with your fingers, but I want you to do that right now. Create a peace sign and look at what that peace sign creates. And then look at this image of the Pearl Harbor, Pearl harder. All right, our peace sign creates this same V shape. So before our peace sign meant peace, it meant victory. That's what it meant. The countercultural movement of the late 1960s in protest of the Vietnam War took that took that victory sign and turned it into the peace sign. Okay, they redefined what it meant. And some 50 years later, it still means that to us. All right, so in this hand, we have a reminder of the string around the finger. We have the V of victory on these knitting needles. And they're held in this hand that is going to be stitching together clothing that's damaged. Now, how does that relate to this whole message? We'll wrap it up here. Remember Pearl Harbor, Pearl harder. Every time you purl, every time you fix that pair of jeans that has a hole in the knee, you sew together a sock that's falling apart, or you fix a shirt by purling it back together, that act of repairing clothing is a remembrance of what happened to our soldiers in Pearl Harbor. Okay? And that matters in World War II because all of the clothing that you can save and conserve on the home front means that we're saving fabric for new uniforms and new blankets and clothing that can be sent overseas to support our troops. What a succinct, beautiful, and symbolic image that's so efficient and so clear and definitive in its message. 5 total words, 3 images, and in that whole simple composition, there's a huge impactful statement. So that's why this stands out as one of my favorite propaganda pieces from World War II. And I think it should be considered maybe a hallmark or a goal for you as well to have that much information come out of such a minimal expression. We'll just jump through a couple more here. I love this one because as we look at it, it's a call and a response. It says America's answer, production. How do we win this war? By producing. But we can read it backwards as well. Production is America's answer. Okay, it's super simple, but it kind of gives this empowering charge to the people that are seeing it. I always find this image interesting because, one thing that you can take away from it and use in your own poster is repetition. More, 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 more production. That leads to the V of victory. But if this poster was shown in 2020 and we ignored the word production at the bottom, what might it be promoting to us? Or I should say, what might it be making us aware of? And I think as we look back here at these smokestacks, in 2020, smokestacks mean pollution. Okay, they mean environmental danger, climate change. We can assign a lot of words to them. In 1941, smokestacks meant we're winning, we're producing, we're creating, we're moving ahead. Okay, and so again, in a mere 70 to 80 years, which seems like a lifetime, maybe it is, but in that time period, something like a smokestack goes from being a super positive expression to something that's super negative and scary. I just like this one because it's creepy. One or two last ones here for you. This idea of when you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Join a car sharing club today. If we think back to the criteria for this project, this is a perfect example of a catchphrase. Okay, so let's look at our catchphrase here. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. And then our factual information. Join a car sharing club today. How do I solve this issue of supporting Hitler? I do it by carpooling with other people. Rather than riding by myself and having Hitler as my co-pilot, I load up my car full of friends. We all drive to work together. And now all of a sudden I'm supporting the war cause. Okay, and so that idea of providing a solution along with your message of awareness is critical for this project. Let's take a look at a couple of student examples. Before I show these to you, I want you to remember, these do not use collage, all right? All of these were created in a normal school environment when we got to meet together in the studio and have access to the variety of materials that we have at school. And so you're going to see the process is different. Watercolor, color pencil, acrylic paint. All those things are fine, but we can do all that same work with collage and maybe even have a more expressive outcome. All right. So this first example here is dealing with the issue of the death penalty. And it's kind of like an old Western cowboy wanted sign. And you see these two skeletal hands holding on to like jail cell bars with the Grim Reaper in the background. Okay, so wanted, more dead than alive. Each case of the death penalty results in the loss of 2 lives, the victim and the inmate. I really love the artistry of this example. And so if we just look at the image first, the beautiful use of dripping watercolor, some reinforcement of like fuzzy color pencil, we see an eyeball, but then when we look more closely, the pupil of the eyeball is actually a person's head. We're looking down on the person and their arms stretch around in this direction. Okay, so here's our head and here's the arms stretching out and around, almost like kind of a mother gathering in its children. Down below, in this kind of bleeding teardrop on the bottom edge of the eye, we see all these fingers pointing inwards, all these hands pointing in, accusatory. All right, and so now when we look at the message, before you start pointing fingers, make sure your hands are clean. All right, this idea of whoever is blameless, throw the first stone, very similar to that. Another really artfully conceived composition. Now you'll notice all of these examples that I'm showing you deal with the death penalty. A number of years ago, the class decided that they all wanted to work on this issue of the death penalty. And so that's why they all relate to each other this way. All right, so we have this syringe is what we have up here in the kind of coming down from the top. That syringe, which would have been used for lethal injection for the death penalty, okay, is full of the types of crimes that someone may be put to death for. Its droplet of poison is creating this ripple effect. And in the middle of it, it says, hatred doesn't heal. Now, you may have heard of that idea of the ripple effect before, how one small stone or one pebble falling in a pond sets off a series of ripples that influence the whole body of water. All right. And so that's what this student was alluding to with the death penalty. That when someone is put to death for a truly horrible thing they've done, it doesn't just impact that person that's being put to death. It creates a ripple effect, like a pebble in a pond, that impacts us all. Hatred doesn't heal. All right. And then the student, and I'll give you time here if you want to come back to the presentation, you can read the text. The student has written kind of a poetic explanation of how the loss of this person creates additional pain and hurt. Talk about simplicity and someone that took the time to boil down all the unnecessary elements and get down to the absolute core of expression. You may look at this at first and be like, oh man, this kid got away with something. Look how they just wrote on a piece of paper. And I can't disagree with you much. There's not much here to see. But in seeing the students' process as they were going through this, they had lots of imagery at first, lots of little doodles and drawings and things they wanted to include. And we just kept cooking it down, kind of getting rid of the impurities, getting rid of the unnecessary stuff until we got just down to the message. And the student, Philip, realized, you know what? The only thing I need in this is the stark reality to face people, the difference between innocence and guilty, and how those two things are often intertwined with each other. Okay, so we just have this word innocent and we have this word guilty, and they're overlapping each other. And then the fact, since 1973, over 130 people have been released from death row with evidence of their innocence. And so this student was really interested in the idea that not everyone on death row is guilty. Some of them have been wrongly accused and prosecuted. And so that means if we've found 130 people and released them since 1973, how many more people were put to death that were actually innocent? Okay, that's the end of the information that I had to show you today. I want you to think about that as an introduction to this project. And as we move through the next couple of weeks and you get more resources from me and more direction from me, I want you to be developing your idea for what it is you believe in, what it is you want to express. And I want to clarify to you, we're not necessarily focusing on the death penalty. Those are just the examples I had for you. We are definitely not focusing on issues from World War II. I just like to use the World War II era propaganda as an example of how propaganda has existed. I want you to dig deep within yourself in 2020 as a teenager in this era, dealing with a very complex world, to think about issues that are relevant to you, important to you, that might also impact other people. All right. I miss y'all. I wish that we were in class together right now sharing this experience, but I look forward to continuing to work with you in any possible way that we can. All right. Take care.